Good afternoon, everybody. Marty Richards with Richland Center Tourism here today with another version of Why Do We Call It That? And it's a Wednesday, so this is a big one. So we pulled out the big guns, and today we're at Krouskup Park, and we're going to find out why do we call it Krouskup Park. If you've been in the Richland Center area to visit, or if you live here or came to visit family, you've probably been to Krouskup Park. And in the last 20 or 30 years, that name has faded a little bit from businesses in the area, so you may not know the history of the Krouskup name. So today you're going to find that out and find out, really what a cool gift this is, but the legend behind it. Because kind of like Paul Harvey, this story has one of those, and here's the rest of the story feelings to it. So let's start with the namesake. And the namesake of the park is A.H. Krouskop, or it was Abiel Hovey Krouskop was his name. So how did A.H. Krouskop get here and the significance of the park? Let's step back to his parents. So originally, about 1851, Abel's parents, Jacob and Elizabeth Krouskup, immigrated here from Ohio and settled actually just down the road a bit in Sextonville. Jacob Krouskup was a pretty good businessman on his own right, and so he had struck out with business interests in Sextonville, and you might have heard us bring that name up previously. Well, by the age of 19, Abiel, or A.H. Krouskop, decided, hey, I'm going to strike out on my own. He actually rented a storefront from his father in Sextonville and started his own mercantile business. Well, that went well for a few years, but A.H. was destined to do bigger things. So he packed up his store, rode down the road just a bit, whatever the road looked like at that point in time, and came into Richland Center. At that point, he made connections with a fellow by the name of J.J. Librand. And ultimately, he bought J.J. Librand's business, which was a mercantile store, from him, and that was the root of A.H. Krouskop's business here in Richland Center. So for years, he expanded upon that business. Ultimately, he built a very ornate two-story brick and mortar building that many people came just to behold, because it was said to be one of the most architecturally significant and impressive buildings in Wisconsin, not just Southwest Wisconsin, but in all of the state. Well, business was great. A.H. Krouskop was doing fine until just a few years later, that building burned down. So he rebuilt the building and actually built a little less, structurally significant building. It was a three-story building, so still impressive, but then built that building, and it was more about business from that point forward than the appearance of business. And you'll kind of hear as we go along, A.H. Krouskop, he was serious about his business. So things go along great. He's starting to grow his business interests. He gets a manager that starts to run his mercantile business, and that allows A.H. Krouskop to then branch out in other interests that he knew could be very profitable. A.H. Krouskop then starts to get into the lumber mill business, builds a sawmill, a steam sawmill, and a very significant one. He also starts a grain and livestock feed business, as well as a stockyard, and then also has some other areas of interest that he's starting to produce income from. By 1911, the Krouskup name and the Krouskup business is all over in Richland Center. And at this point, A.H. Krouskop is still living in an apartment in his original mercantile store. So life goes on. Krouskup is building his business. He's in all areas. He's in lumber. He's in finished goods. He also, at this point, and this is important to remember at the end here, he also is very instrumental in bringing the railroad to Richland Center. It helps him with shipping his lumber products, because at this point he is manufacturing all sorts of lumber products, not just 2x4s, but finished wood products, flooring products, and they were of high demand everywhere throughout the United States. And when the railroad came, that allowed him to begin marketing to the Pacific coast, and his materials were very much of demand there, and it was a really profitable endeavor for him. He also continued at this point in 1911 with a brick business. He also had the livestock yards, the feed mill, and started an implement dealership. He had his hands pretty much in everything and anything. So at this point, he's got a little bit of competition going on, because this name's going to sound a little bit familiar, and that is A.D. German. Well, A.D. German's warehouse was just up the street. They literally were separated by about a block in competition. And remember, at this point, A.H. Krouskop is still living in an apartment in his mercantile store. Well, A.H. Krouskop is known at this point as being very frugal. He's a spendthrift. He really doesn't spend a lot of unnecessary money, and he's growing his businesses very well. He did always dress nice and look very professional in appearance, but he wasn't frivolous with his spending. Well, the one time he actually spends quite a bit of money is when he builds the Krouskup mansion, which is really just across the street at the corner of Hazeltine and Central Avenues, really across the street from his implement and farm feed business, but most notably in a spat with A.D. German and his work against him to block A.D. German's access to the railroad. So that's the one time he actually spent money on himself, was really with a business interest in mind. So again, A.H. Krouskop, things are going great. His business is going great. Really, when the railroad came in, he also really had a pretty good demand of access to the railroad as well. Very, very smart, very intelligent businessman. The quote on him at that time was, A.H. Krouskop is all business all the time. And here is where you get to hear the rest of the story about Krouskup Park. So it's about that same time that he has around 27 acres of land here on the west side of the city, and he decides he's going to give this land to the city to have a park for the city to enjoy and to help with the beautification of the city. That's the public phrasing of it. Well, when he gives the land to the city, there's a little stipulation that they have to agree that they will never let the railroad go through the park and go to the west. He kind of sells it as it's a safety concern, but most notably, nothing would be enjoyable about locomotives coming through the park during a Sunday picnic. The city agrees, takes the land to use just as a park and not to let the railroad come through, and lo and behold, they find out later that actually A.H. Krouskop did this for a business purpose in mind again, because that meant the railroad would never venture west of the city. And guess what business A.H. Krouskop also had? Yes, a freight business. So any community west of Richland Center had to go to him to get access to the railroad. So he was quite intelligent, pretty sharp on how to make sure he got business. Again, the park here today, if you've been here to Richland Center, very likely you've used some of the services here. There are campsites for recreational vehicle hookups, electrical and water hookups. So it's a really, really nice setup. There are softball fields. I know I've played a lot of softball here. There's also playground equipment, many shelters for picnics and group gatherings. And then also our latest addition here is the Joan Woodman Orton Aquatic Center that is really fantastic. I know many kids approve of that, and it's been just a fantastic addition to our city. When you come visit, I encourage that you do so. Check out the Aquatic Center if it's a little warmer than this right now. But other than that, there's also hiking and snowshoe trails here. So it's really a four-season adventure. It is a great gift from A.H. Krouskop and very much appreciated and used by the citizens. So what's the postscript on Abiel Hovey Krouskop? He actually lived a long life, a bachelor, lifelong bachelor, never married, no children. He did pass away in 1930, just short of 90 years old. So really an industrious man that did some really fantastic things, but he was pretty ruthless with his competitors. So that's why we call it Krouskup Park. I hope you enjoyed it. We really do appreciate it when you share our videos with others. You know, it's a good way for us to show off the area and also just let others know the beauty that we have here in the middle of the Driftless region, right here in Richland Center, Wisconsin. So, for Richland Center Tourism, I'm Marty Richards. Let's everybody have a great day.